They say time heals all wounds, but what they forget to mention is that some scars only heal when we face those who denied them. I returned to the witness stand that day, not to reclaim my property or honor, but to prove that, for someone who has lost their home, their child, their family, justice can also know love if the one seeking it is a mother who has endured too much. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Linda Villasenor. I'm 65 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. I never thought that one day I would step into this place again. That courtroom, the place where every hammer strike used to make me tremble, where justice and lies once blended together like water and blood, remained exactly as it was when I left. The only thing that had changed was me. When the wooden door opened, the creak of the hinges sounded like a warning. The entire courtroom turned to look at me. A few familiar faces, a few reporters raising their cameras, but I didn't care. All I could see were the eyes of Judge Morales, staring at me with a look mixed with astonishment, confusion, and fear. It was the look of someone who had once known me all too well. "Mrs. Linda Villasenor," he said, his voice deep and slow. "I didn't expect to see you in this courtroom again." I merely smiled, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. My hands were tightly clutching the case file, the papers inside trembling as if they had a soul of their own. I answered calmly, but every word felt like it was stabbing the air. "I didn't think I'd return here either, Your Honor, but sometimes we don't get to choose the moment we must stand up." Silence enveloped the room. A few whispered my name, as though repeating a long-dead legend. I, Linda Villasenor, the lawyer who once struck fear into the hearts of Chicago's legal community with my sharpness, coldness, and ruthlessness. Then, one day, I disappeared from every trial, every headline. They said I had fallen. They said I had run away. But no one knew that I was simply trying to survive after my heart was betrayed by the very justice I had trusted. Years later, I chose to live quietly in the suburbs, among lavender fields and a blind cat. I thought my life would pass like that, peaceful, anonymous, with no trace of the law, no more torment. Until that night, when the phone rang, Michael's voice, my son, was trembling, weak, like a lost child in the rain. I had an accident, Mom. Sarah, she's fine, but I can't walk anymore, and Jessica, she's not coming to the hospital." My heart tightened as I listened. My son's voice, once strong, once my pride, now choked with fear, breaking into pieces. "Son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'll be there, no matter where." And I truly came. That night, in the sterile hospital corridor, I saw my son lying there, his legs in casts, his eyes hollow like someone who had lost all light. And Jessica, the wife he once loved with all his heart, had not appeared. Only a card was left on the chair, with the cold message, "You take care of it, Michael. I'm tired." In that moment, I knew I couldn't continue living in silence. And today, after nearly 7 years away from the law, I returned, not as a lawyer, but as a mother. Before me, Jessica Torres sat at the defendant's table. Her black hair waved in soft curls, a luxurious white suit, and a perfectly made-up face. If you didn't know better, you would think she was the epitome of a successful, confident woman. But I knew the truth. Behind that makeup was a fake, a soul rotten with ambition. She looked up and caught my eye, a cold, arrogant smile, full of challenge. "Are you still doing well, Mother?" She emphasized the word mother with a mocking tone. I replied with a calm smile. "Thank you. I've lived long enough to witness those who once scorned justice being crushed by it." She fell silent, but her eyes flashed with fury. Beside her was Michael, my son. He sat there, his head bowed, his hand trembling lightly on his knee. Every time Jessica turned to him, her voice was soft but loud enough for me to hear. "Answer. Don't stay silent like this, or they'll think you're weak." Michael didn't respond. And me. I just wanted to stand up, walk over, and hug my son. But I couldn't. This was a courtroom. And here, emotions were the rarest luxury. The trial began. The lawyer's voice echoed steadily, like the strike of a hammer. I sat at the back, silently observing. No detail escaped my gaze. Every time Jessica pretended to wipe away a tear, I noticed those were carefully calculated tears. Every time she spoke about the pain from the accident, I saw a slight curve at the corner of her lips, the sign of someone acting skillfully. I quickly texted Robert Medina, a former colleague now turned private detective. "She's here. Keep an eye on her." Every gesture. Robert replied almost instantly. "I'm outside in the car, watching. Linda, don't act rashly. She's not the type to fall for a trap easily." I smiled faintly. "Robert, I've beaten those far more cunning than her." But inside, I still felt cold. Not because I feared Jessica, but because I feared myself. I feared the part of me that had once turned me into Iron Linda was coming back. When Jessica's lawyer tried to prove Michael could no longer afford his expenses, I saw my son's hand tighten. He looked down, not reacting. And me, in my mind, I was counting every second. Every second he stayed silent was another second she won. Jessica looked at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph, her lips slightly curled. I knew what she was thinking. She thought I was just an old, weak mother, a ghost of the old legal world. But she forgot. The phoenix doesn't die in its ashes. It is reborn from its own flames. The trial took a break. Morales called me over. "Mrs. Villaseñor," he said quietly, "do you really want to get involved in this case? It could ruin your reputation again." I looked him straight in the eye. "You once believed in justice, didn't you?" He fell silent. "I used to too. But the difference is, I never gave up on it." I left my seat and walked straight past Jessica. She looked up, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "How touching," she said softly. "An old mother, fighting for her disabled son. But the world doesn't reward the weak." I stopped, leaned close to her ear, and whispered, "You're wrong, Jessica. I'm not fighting to win. I'm fighting so you can never sleep peacefully again." Then I walked away. The long corridor, the late afternoon light spilling through the glass panes, casting my shadow on the stone floor. The shadow of a woman who once fell, but now stood again, not to prove anything, but to protect the only things left in her life, her son and granddaughter. I stopped in front of the large glass window, looking at myself. The face with wrinkles that couldn't be hidden, but in those eyes, there was still a fire. The fire of someone who had lost everything, and therefore had nothing left to fear. I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse. "Peace doesn't come from running away, Linda. It only comes after the storm has passed." Then I turned around, walked through the heavy wooden door. On the other side, the battle was waiting. I tightened the case file in my hands, feeling the warmth of my palms spreading, the warmth of life, the warmth of an old flame burning again. I took a deep breath. Then I stepped inside. This battle I will not lose, not because I am strong, but because this time I fight not just for justice, but for my heart. Monday morning, the sky over Chicago was as murky as a dusty window. I sat in my car, looking at the old courthouse in front of me, the place that had been my battlefield many years ago. The clock on the dashboard ticked minute by minute, but I still hadn't moved from my seat. The cold coffee in my hand, bitter with a metallic taste, kept me more awake than any sleep could. When I stepped in, the courtroom was full. Today, it wasn't just a trial. It was the first line drawn between me and Jessica. I felt it in every breath of the room. Morales sat in the high chair, his gaze touching me for only a second. There was something in his eyes, half warning, half respect. "Ms. Villaseñor?" he said, his voice deep as though trying to keep the air from exploding. "You're reaffirming? You're not a lawyer in this case, correct?" I stood up, my voice calm but firm. "That's correct, Your Honor. I'm not here to represent anyone today. I'm just a mother, standing to protect justice when it's being twisted by the wicked." A wave of whispers spread across the room. Some people looked surprised, others chuckled. But Jessica, she just tilted her head, curling her lips into a smug smile, her dark red lips curling in a mocking arc. "Justice," she murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "Justice won't help you feed your son." I merely smiled, my eyes cold as steel. I was used to people like her, those who thought money could buy everything, even the truth. The trial began. Jessica's lawyer, a young man with a smooth, cold voice, started weaving their story. He painted Michael as a weak, unstable man after the accident, someone who had lost control of his emotions and finances. I sat there, my hands tightening, listening to every word, each sentence a knife. I wanted to stand up, object to every falsehood, but I knew I couldn't. I wasn't the lawyer of this court anymore. Now I was just a mother, and I had to choose the right moment to strike. As they continued to dig into Michael's wounds, I pulled out my phone under the table and quickly texted Robert Medina, a former colleague now working as a private detective. "Robert, check Jessica's bank transactions. I want to know the transfers she's made recently." The response came just a few minutes later. "I'm on it. Linda, be careful. She's not the type to fall for a trap." I put my phone away, my eyes still locked on Jessica. She sat upright, her face calm, but her hands were clenched tightly under the table. I noticed it because I had been her. When the trial took a break, I left the room walking down the corridor where the light filtered through tall windows. The cold air rushed in. I needed a moment to think. Then I heard the familiar voice. Jessica's voice. She was talking on the phone at the end of the hall, her voice small but urgent. "You need to send the money before the trial ends. I can't live with a crippled guy. Don't lecture me. If you don't keep your promise, I'll let everyone know about us." I stood still, listening to every word. The pieces began to fall into place. When she turned around, I was standing there, just a few steps away. She froze, trying to hide her confusion. "I didn't expect you to enjoy eavesdropping," she said, a forced smile on her face. I responded, my voice low and slow. "I'm not eavesdropping, Jessica. I'm just standing where the truth walks by." She sneered, then walked past me, her expensive perfume leaving an ethereal trace in the air. But I didn't look after her. I had seen enough. In the afternoon, when the trial resumed, I saw Michael looking at me, his gaze weak, but still with a hint of hope. I nodded slightly. He didn't need to know my plan. He just needed to believe that I was still fighting. Jessica's lawyer began to focus on the stability for the child. He claimed Sarah needed a balanced mother, a stable environment, and no financial pressure. Every time he said mother, it felt like a slap to Michael. I saw my son bow his head, his eyes glued to the floor. I clenched my fist. My patience was nearing its limit. But then, my phone vibrated. Robert had sent a message. 2 transfers of $25,000 each to William Harris, Jessica's company's CFO. They were at the Grandview Hotel last night. There are photos. I looked at the screen, feeling the heat rush to my neck. William Harris, the name Michael had once mentioned. Jessica's close colleague. Now everything was clear. When the trial ended, Morales gently tapped the gavel, signaling a recess. I stood up, slowly walking toward the door. Jessica walked past me, stopping for half a second, whispering, "You're losing this battle, Linda. Let it end with dignity. Don't let them laugh at you again." I turned to her, looking her straight in the eye. "Laugh? Jessica, I've been laughed at enough. Now it's your turn." She frowned, walking away, her high heels tapping on the floor like a ticking clock. I left the courthouse, the cold wind whipping against my face, but my heart was burning. The pieces in my mind had begun to come together into a complete picture. I wasn't just fighting for Michael, but for Sarah, for that child's future. That night, I sat in my room, spreading the photos Robert had sent on the table. Jessica and Harris, in the hotel lobby, the lights reflecting off wine glasses. Both of them were smiling, the smile of those who thought they were safe. I opened my notebook, writing the first line after many years. Tomorrow, the line will be drawn, and this time, I won't flinch. I closed the notebook, turned off the light. The last light from the window illuminated a photo of Michael and Sarah taken before the accident. I stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "Son, you fell for love, but I'll rise for justice." The night wind rustled through the curtains. Outside, the city fell asleep. And I, the woman who had once left her past behind, was preparing for a day when justice would no longer be a distant concept. Tomorrow, the real battle begins. The next morning, I returned to Michael's small apartment, a place once filled with laughter, now only the smell of disinfectant and silence. I opened the door gently, afraid of disturbing my son, but he was already awake. Michael sat in the dim light, the morning sun streaming through the window, casting shadows on his hollow face. His eyes were dull and sad, as if he could see the entire world but no longer wanted to touch it. "Can't sleep?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head slightly. I tried. But every time I close my eyes, I hear the sound of metal clashing. I understood he was talking about the accident. The crash hadn't just broken his legs, it had shattered his belief in life. I moved closer, poured him a glass of water, but his hand trembled, spilling some over the rim. "Don't try to forget," I said softly. "Some memories can't be erased, but we can learn to live with them." He looked up, his eyes red. "But Mom, what if it's all my fault? I trusted the wrong person. I let Jessica control everything, the accounts, the child. I ruined myself." His words twisted my heart. I wanted to embrace him, but my arms felt stiff. Being a mother is sometimes a paradox. You want to protect your child from pain, but that very love makes you feel their pain twice as much. Michael, I said, trying to keep calm. Son, mistakes don't kill anyone, only silence does. As for Jessica, she didn't control you. She only took advantage of the space you left behind. He looked at me, his eyes tortured. I did everything for her, Mom. Do you know? I bought the house, co-signed, paid for everything. I thought she really loved me. But it turns out, she was just waiting for the day I'd collapse so she could take it all. He paused, his voice breaking. And Sarah, she doesn't call me anymore. Every time she hears my voice, Jessica tells her she's busy studying. Do you know what she's telling her, Mom? I didn't answer. I knew. And that was worse than any curse. Jessica was planting twisted stories in the child's mind, turning the father into the villain. I stepped closer, placing my hand on his shoulder. Michael, you haven't lost your daughter. You just need to reclaim the truth. He fell silent, tears falling onto my hand. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry with my son. Not because I was weak, but because we were cleansing things that had been hidden too long. Guilt, regret, and love that had never disappeared. When Michael drifted off to sleep, I sat by the window. Outside, the early light reflected off the tall buildings. I took out my phone and texted Robert, "Meet me at the old cafe. I need to see everything you have." By noon, the corner cafe was just as it had always been. The strong smell of coffee and the faint jazz music in the air. Robert sat in a hidden corner, his laptop in hand, his face tense. He slid a thick folder toward me. "You won't believe this, Linda," he said. Jessica didn't just betray her husband. She used Michael's name to take out loans. There are 3 credit accounts in his name, and all the money's been funneled to William Harris's company. I flipped through the files, my eyes scanning the cold numbers. $30,000, $50,000, $80,000. All signed, Michael Villesneur. My throat went dry. She forged his signature? Robert nodded. Not only that, I found a transaction where $10,000 was transferred from her personal account to Chicago Life newspaper. It looks like Jessica hired someone to spread rumors that you were once disciplined when practicing law. I chuckled softly, a bitter laugh. She wants to destroy me from the ground up. Robert placed his hand on the table, his voice dropping. You're fighting someone who doesn't know boundaries. Be careful, Linda. I nodded. I've faced people like her all my life, Robert. But there's one difference this time. I'm not fighting for the court's justice anymore. I'm fighting for a mother's justice. He looked at me, then sighed softly. I know you won't stop. In the afternoon, I returned to the apartment. Michael was still asleep. I gently pulled the blanket over his shoulders and then walked into the living room. Sarah used to have a small corner there, a little study desk with a star-shaped sticker, a pen with the cap off. On the desk, I saw a crumpled piece of paper. I opened it. It was in Child's handwriting. Mom told me not to believe what Dad says. Mom says Dad doesn't love me anymore. I sank down, my hand trembling. In that moment, my heart felt like it was being torn in two. A part of me hurt for Michael. The other, for the little granddaughter caught in the adult's mess. I carefully folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket pocket. It wasn't just evidence. It was a reminder of who I was fighting for. At night, when the city lights flickered on, I sat alone by the window. Outside, the cars lined up, their lights reflecting on the glass like bright scars. I realized that betrayal didn't just leave wounds in the heart, it also left scars in the soul. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Every scar was part of me: the mother, the lawyer, the woman who had lost everything and still stood up. I picked up my phone and replayed the recording Robert sent from the hotel camera. Jessica's laughter, the sound of wine glasses clinking, and William's voice whispering, "We're almost done. Just keep the little one quiet." I turned it off, leaving the silence to fill the room. Tomorrow, I'll bring this evidence to court. Tomorrow, I'll let Jessica understand what it means to pay the price. But tonight, I'll allow myself to be silent. I picked up the photo of Sarah on the shelf, gently stroking the innocent face. "Little one," I whispered, "you'll know the truth, not to hate your mom, but to understand that true love is never built on lies." I closed my eyes. The sound of rain began to fall outside the window, soft as the city's breath. And in the darkness, I realized, inside me, the fire still burned, the fire of a mother who once lost everything, and now was preparing to take it all back. That morning, the sky over Chicago was gloomy, the cold mist from the Hudson River blowing down the narrow streets. I wore my old trench coat, walking quickly toward the cafe, where Robert had arranged to meet. After a night with little sleep, I felt I had crossed the line between humanity and instinct. The instinct of a mother when her child is hurt. Robert was already sitting at a corner table, his face tense. In front of him was a laptop and several thick files. When I got closer, he looked at me, not greeting me, just saying, "I found what you needed." I sat down and opened the first file. The bold text at the top made me pause. "William Harris, transactions record." Robert pointed to the numbers, his voice steady. "She's been financially linked with Harris for at least 4 months. These two set up a fake fund called Harris Consulting. Money from Jessica's accounts flows through it, under the guise of consulting fees." I flipped to the next page. 3 signatures exactly like Michael's. But they were forged. "She forged my son's signature." Robert nodded. "Exactly. And she did it to create a record showing Michael was jointly investing in Harris's company. If the divorce succeeds, she could legalize all that money as hers." I clenched my fist so tightly that my nails dug into my palm. The anger wasn't fire anymore. It was molten steel. "What about Sarah?" I asked. Robert opened another file. "This is the worst part." He pointed to the screen, showing a series of messages. "Jessica sent gifts and money to the child through the maid. And here?" He clicked to play a recording. Jessica's voice came through, sweet yet cold. "Sarah, you need to tell the court that your dad doesn't take care of you, that he's always angry. If you do this, I'll take you to Disneyland." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Every boundary inside me collapsed. This wasn't just between adults. This was the destruction of a child's soul. I stood up, speaking softly but firmly. "Robert, I won't let her do this for another day. Prepare all the evidence. Tomorrow, I'll submit it to the court." Robert grabbed my hand, his voice low. "Linda, I know you. Once you take action, there's no turning back. But, are you sure?" I looked at him. "I have no other choice. She's gone after my son, and now she's after my granddaughter. That price must be paid." At noon, I returned to the courthouse to meet Morales. He was in his private office, reading through files. When he saw me, he looked up and sighed. "I knew you'd come back." I placed the stack of documents on the table. "I have evidence of Jessica Torres' witness manipulation and financial fraud. Morales looked at me intently. Linda, I have to remind you that gathering evidence outside the legal process could be considered inadmissible. I understand, I said. But I used to be a lawyer. I know where the line is, and this time, I haven't crossed it. I'm just doing what justice forgot to do. He was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're still the same. Still stubborn. But you know, sometimes justice can't win against the power games. I looked back at him with cold eyes. Maybe. But justice has memory, Morales. And today, it's standing at your door. He lowered his gaze, reading, his face slowly changing as he looked at Jessica's messages with Sarah. He looked up, his voice trembling. She really did this? Yes, I replied. And I'll make her face the consequences of every lie. Morales leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes for a long while, then spoke softly. All right. I'll allow you to submit this evidence into the official record. But Linda, if you do this, you'll drag yourself into the storm. Are you ready for that? I smiled faintly. I've lived in storms my whole life, Morales. I'm just learning how to face the wind. That afternoon, I went back to Michael's apartment. He was sitting in his wheelchair, looking out at the balcony. The sunset bathed his hair in a golden light, and for a moment, I saw the image of the boy he used to be. The son who would run around the backyard, holding a paper airplane and shouting, Mom, I'll fly higher than the clouds. I walked over, placing my hand on his shoulder. Michael, I need you to be strong. Tomorrow, we'll present the evidence in court. He turned to me, his eyes full of worry. Mom, what if we lose? I shook my head. No, son. Losing isn't losing. Losing is when you stop fighting for what's right. He fell silent, then suddenly took my hand. Mom, I'm sorry. Back then, I said you only knew law, not love. I was wrong. I froze, feeling a lump in my throat. No, son, you were right. I chose justice over family. But now I understand. Justice means nothing if it can't protect those you love. We sat in silence. Only the sound of the wind and the fading light of the sunset remained. That night, I couldn't sleep. I took the stack of files and placed them in front of me. Each page, each number was a piece of the truth. But in the middle of the words, I saw Sarah's image, her innocent eyes being pulled into the adult's war. I wondered, when everything was laid bare tomorrow, how would she look at her mother? With anger, pity, or fear? But then I knew I couldn't stop, because if no one stands up, lies will continue to grow on silence. I picked up the pen and wrote a short line at the end of the file. I, Linda Villishneur, submit this file not to seek revenge, but to protect the soul of a child. I set the pen down, took a deep breath. The moonlight fell on the desk, cold but bright, as if revealing every wound I had ever carried. Tomorrow, I will return to court. Tomorrow, the hunt for the truth will begin. And this time, I will not leave until justice rises. Some battles don't need guns. All it takes is a moment of silence, long enough to expose everything. That day, when I stepped into the house that Michael was trying to call home, the atmosphere was so heavy that I took a deep breath and almost choked. The living room's diameter felt like a tightening noose, a place where every laugh had been replaced by purposeful silences. Jessica was there. She stood in the middle of the room, hands on her hips, her posture that of a homeowner, her gaze slightly condescending. She was dressed nicely in a fitted dress, but what caught my attention wasn't her outfit. but the way she spoke. Each sentence sweet as honey, but as cold as ice. When she saw me, she slightly curled her lips, as if she had just seen a mosquito caught in a net. "You're early," she said, her voice sweet but twisted. "Michael is still asleep. He needs rest." The words flowed out easily, but I could feel the sharp knife beneath the gloss of her smile. I walked in, placed my coat on the chair, and tried to maintain a calm demeanor. "I just came to check if the little one's home," I replied. My voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the silence spread through the room. Sarah was playing in her room at the back. The sound of colored pencils, the tearing of paper, the sound that made my heart soften. Jessica smirked. "Oh, you visit occasionally. It's nice that you care." She said care, as if reminding me of a debt. The way she looked at Michael, not with the eyes of someone who loved him, but with the eyes of an assessor, made me cold. I walked toward the window, pretending to be distracted. Inside, Jessica continued her performance, asking about schedules, bringing up Michael's past mistakes, and throwing in a few words about Sarah's future if her parents can't be there. Each sentence she spoke was a hook in my son's heart. When she turned away, I heard the quiet buzz of a phone. She grabbed it and whispered, "Him? I need money now. If you don't transfer, I know how to handle this." Her voice was low, tinged with panic. She emphasized, "I need money," like a refrain. I stepped closer, leaned against the door frame, making no attempt to hide myself. Jessica jumped, looking at me, trying to appear nonchalant. "You're eavesdropping again?" she sneered. "How annoying." "I'm not eavesdropping," I replied slowly. "I'm just standing where the conversations of those deciding the future of a child usually pass by." I finished, waiting for her reaction. She looked down, her eyes briefly filled with worry. I saw the crack in her mask. There's something interesting about people. When they're backed into a corner, they always end up showing a weakness. Jessica was no exception. She tried to joke, "People need money for personal reasons. Everyone goes through hard times." But there was a hint of threat in her joke. I moved closer to Michael, placing my hand on his shoulder. He looked up, his eyes confused, still not used to the feeling of having someone protect him. He didn't say anything. He only squeezed my hand lightly, as if searching for a point of support. I told myself, I will not abandon him. After I left, I sat in the car outside, calling Robert. "Did you hear the recording from the other night?" I asked. Robert said yes. "Do you have anything else?" I heard the sound of a phone screen flipping. Then Robert said, "There were a few transfers last night and a bar receipt, but most importantly, the meeting at the hotel. I'm tracking Harris. He has financial ties to Jessica. Stay silent. Let her talk more. She'll expose herself." My strategy wasn't to rush and grab Jessica by the neck right now. I needed her to expose herself, to catch the offhand comments, the rushed messages to compare with the files. I didn't want to use the power of a former lawyer to intimidate. I wanted the truth to reveal itself. 2 days later, I had an unexpected meeting at the small tea shop where Jessica often took Sarah to buy things for the little one. I sat in the corner, watching Jessica play the role of the caring mother with the child. She spread her arms like a saint, welcoming every gaze. Sarah laughed, and that moment made my heart soften. But I didn't let my emotions overpower my judgment. When Jessica hurriedly stood up to go outside, I followed her. She was panting, looking around, and then spoke to someone on the phone. "I'll be fine. Just send the money. Keep quiet about the photos. I'll handle the old folks. The last words were filled with scheming. The old folks? Clearly, she wasn't just talking about me, but about any witnesses who could contradict her. I didn't call out, didn't shout. Instead, I pulled a small camera from my bag and took a few pictures. The photos wouldn't bring back the pain, but they were essential pieces. The image of Jessica glancing at her purse, holding the phone, her face showing a slight panic. All of it was captured. At home, I sat comparing. The messages, transfers, receipts, each piece locked into place. I was preparing to submit a request to subpoena Harris and ask for the analysis of the forged signatures. But before sending, I needed one more thing: an unofficial confession from Jessica. I wanted her to admit it herself, in front of someone who could oppose her. And, as Robert had predicted, she couldn't contain herself. During a meeting with a consultant to arrange paperwork, Jessica forgot to turn off the phone. In the imperfect recording, she spoke to the man. "If the judge subpoenas Harris, please keep the reporters at bay. And if anyone asks about the gifts for Sarah, tell them it was voluntary. We have to make everything look natural." Her voice was both rushed and arrogant. That was one of the moments I had been waiting for. The admission, however vague, was enough to crack her shield. I printed the recording, marked the time, and prepared to submit it to the judge at the next session. But life rarely gives you all the answers without conditions. That afternoon, when I returned, Robert came to meet me, his face pale. He read aloud a few lines from an email. "Harris just sent a threatening message. If you continue to intervene, he'll dig deeper into Michael's records. There are things you shouldn't touch." A threat. Not to me, but to Michael. I felt my heart tighten, as if someone had squeezed it. Robert looked up at me. "He's scared, Linda. They could twist public opinion." I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air rush into my lungs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Sarah, about Michael, about the loneliness of the little granddaughter caught in the adult spin. I also thought about the choices. Expose all the evidence immediately and risk having my son attacked, or slowly peel back each layer, making the betrayer slip into the trap I had set. I chose the second path, the strategy of the hunter. I needed to expose Harris. I needed Jessica to confess in words, not just through documents. I needed justice to win not only on paper, but in the conscience of everyone who witnessed it. Before ending the night, I walked into Michael's room, watching him sleep soundly, his face damp with sweat. I leaned down, placing my hand on his forehead, as I had when he was little, whispering, "Son, I will pull you out of this muck. I won't let you lose both your soul and the image of a father in your child." I knew the road ahead would be long. Jessica wouldn't be easily defeated. They would fight back. But there was something I hadn't told anyone. Inside me, amidst the old scars, another fire burned. Not just for justice, but for the belief that a child deserves a truth to grow up with. And as the night fell, I prepared for the next confrontation. No noise, no fuss, but enough daggers to pierce the heart of the betrayer. The next chapter would be the moment I had to lay my cards on the table, and everything would no longer be a test. That morning, Chicago was unusually cold. It wasn't raining, but the fog hung thick in the air, as if the city was hiding something. I arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual, a sense of unease building inside me, but not fear. It was the feeling of someone about to enter a familiar place, a place that had once hurt them, but this time they were returning to finish everything. Before the trial, I was called to meet Judge Morales. His office was just the same. The old wooden desk, walls lined with certificates, and the smell of bitter coffee mingling with damp paper. He looked up when I entered, his gaze both firm and somewhat confused. "You look different, Linda," he said, his voice slow and hoarse. "You're not the same woman I used to see in this courtroom." I smiled faintly. I used to fight for justice. Today, I fight for family. Morales stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I've read the file you submitted. I must admit, there's evidence in here that's hard to believe. But perhaps I owe you an apology for what I failed to see in the past." I stayed silent. Some words don't need to be spoken to soothe the heart. Morales, once my symbol of law, was now sitting before me, acknowledging that he too had been wrong. In that moment, I realized justice wasn't an unshakable wall. It could sway, but as long as someone had the courage to stand firm, it would straighten itself again. "I only have one wish," I said. "Please allow me to present the truth to the fullest." Morales nodded quietly. "Linda, I believe you. But remember, justice is a double-edged sword. Whoever wields it must be strong enough not to cut themselves." When I entered the courtroom, Jessica was already sitting there. She wore a pristine white dress, her hair neatly styled, and her eyes sparkled as if this were just a casual meeting, not a trial determining fate. I knew that trick, using appearances to win sympathy. But there was one thing she forgot. I was once a lawyer, and my eyes had seen too many fakes. The trial began. The air was heavy. I could feel every breath in the room. Jessica's lawyer tried to twist the situation, claiming that I had gathered illegal evidence and that it was improper procedure. I didn't react. I let them speak, then stood up, gently placing 3 files, a USB drive, and a photo of Sarah smiling brightly in Michael's arms on the table. "Your Honor," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I am not here to win or lose. I am here to make one thing clear. No one, not even a mother, has the right to use love as a tool to manipulate a child." Morales signaled the clerk to play the recording. The room fell silent. Jessica's voice echoed, soft but full of calculation. "Sarah, if you tell the court that your dad doesn't love you, I'll take you to Disneyland." 1 second, then 2. A sigh filled the room. I looked at Michael. His head was bowed, his hands clenched. The entire room sank into a heavy silence, like a stone pressing on my chest. Morales quietly removed his glasses, gently touching his forehead. "This evidence is real?" he asked. "All of it has been verified by investigator Robert Medina," I answered, my eyes not leaving Jessica. "And if necessary, I can provide the original data from her phone." Jessica still maintained a faint smile, but I saw her hands tremble. Her fake calm was starting to crack. I looked straight at her. "You know, Jessica, I used to be someone like you. I believed that if I was clever enough, if I spoke just right, I could redefine the truth. But then I realized the truth doesn't need anyone to define it. It just needs to be exposed." She bit her lip and turned away. As for Morales, he looked at me with a gaze that was both surprised and somewhat admiring. "The court acknowledges this evidence," he said. "We will summon the relevant witnesses." The gavel struck. That sound was not just a legal formality. To me, it was the bell tolling that the wall of lies was beginning to crack. Leaving the courthouse, the press rushed toward me. Camera flashes lit up the room. Someone asked, Ms. Villaseñor, are you doing all of this for revenge? I stopped, looked straight into the camera. No, I'm doing this for a child who needs to know that the truth has no price. I walked away. Behind me, they continued calling my name, but I didn't turn around. For the first time in years, I felt peace in my heart, not because of victory, but because I had done the right thing. In the afternoon, Morales called me back to his office. He stared at me for a long while, then spoke softly. Linda, the old case, part of the responsibility is mine. I let a strong woman like you walk away from justice because you felt betrayed. Today, you returned, not for revenge, but to save it. Thank you. I stayed silent. Sometimes confessions don't need to be spoken aloud. His apology, silent, sincere, eased my heart more than 100 excuses ever could. That night, when I returned home, I sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect on the glass. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the distant sound of car horns. On the table was the photo of Sarah, my granddaughter, growing up between two worlds, one of love and one of lies. I whispered, "Little one, you'll understand. The truth may hurt, but it will never harm you. It will save you from living in the dark." I closed the notebook, turned off the light. Inside me, there was a rare peace, the kind that comes after the storm, when you're no longer afraid of the waves. Tomorrow, I will return to court. Tomorrow, the hunt for the truth will begin. And this time, I will not go alone. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The pale sunlight poured through the window, weaving between the piles of paperwork left on the desk. I hadn't slept all night. I sat checking every detail, every number, every recording. Robert said I didn't need to redo anything, that everything was perfect. But I couldn't be at ease without seeing it with my own eyes. Today wasn't just another trial. It was the point of no return. I made coffee but hadn't had a chance to drink it. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but because I could feel the weight of each truth I was about to lay out on the courtroom table. These lifeless sheets of paper, when put together, could change the fate of an entire family. I knew Jessica wouldn't fall easily. She had spent her life playing the perfect role: the devoted wife, the gentle mother, the successful woman. But today, that facade would crack. When I arrived at the courthouse, the atmosphere was unusual. On the steps, a few reporters waited, their cameras tracking my every move. They whispered about the trial of the century between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, about the lawyer returning after stepping away from justice. I didn't care. All I saw were two things: justice and Sarah. Jessica entered behind me, holding a white leather purse, her hair neatly pinned, her heels clicking sharply on the stone floor. All eyes were on her. She knew it, and she smiled. A half smile, arrogant to the point of shamelessness. I had seen that smile hundreds of times on the faces of liars who thought they were winning. When Judge Morales's gavel struck, the entire room fell silent. Morales looked at us, his eyes cold but sad. I could sense something different in his gaze. A weariness, but also a small flicker of hope that this time, justice would be in its rightful place. Jessica's lawyer began his presentation, his voice loud and lecturing. He painted Jessica as a strong woman overcoming tragedy, trying to maintain happiness for the child while the father lost control. He recounted Michael's accident, then looked at me as if to say, "This mother is exploiting grief for revenge." I listened to each word, each sentence, without reacting. I had learned that in a courtroom, Silence at the right moment is the sharpest weapon. When he finished, Morales looked at me. Mrs. Villaseñor, do you have anything to present? I stood up. The sound of my heels on the floor echoed loudly in the quiet room. I walked up, holding a small USB drive and a thick file. Your Honor, I'd like to present new evidence. Everything has been verified and lawfully gathered. I placed the USB on the table, then turned back to face Jessica. Our eyes met. She still smiled, but that smile had a slight crack. On the large screen in the courtroom, the email lines appeared, sent from Jessica T. to wharrisaconsultinggroup.com. You did well. Just transfer another $20,000 to the company account. I'll finalize the papers. We need to make Michael look like an irresponsible person. The room buzzed. Jessica's lawyer stood up, protesting, but Morales signaled for silence. This is just part of it, I said, my voice still calm. Next, the bank statement. The screen continued showing numbers. $25,000 transferred to Harris, $9,500 for the witness preparation office, and a hotel bill from the Grand View Hotel, with the name Jessica Torres as the booking holder. The small note at the bottom made the entire courtroom fall silent. Suite 507, 2 guests. Jessica turned red. She tried to remain calm, sitting up straight, but her hands were clasped tightly. I knew that was a sign of fear. Robert stood up, called as a witness. He confirmed the investigation process. We gathered this data legally, with a subpoena from the lower court. The transactions matched the timing of the meetings between Ms. Torres and William Harris. Jessica's lawyer tried to interrupt, firing rapid questions. Could these transactions be personal, unrelated to the case? Robert didn't blink. If they're personal, why do they match the timing of her filing for custody and transferring asset titles? And why does the payment note say, for consulting evidence? Morales was silent, but his gaze was as heavy as a judgment. I took a step forward, my voice lowering. And finally, I'd like the court to hear a recording. I pressed the button. The speaker came to life. Jessica's voice, clear and cold. If the little one agrees to lie in court, I'll take her to Disneyland. She likes that place. Just one word, and everything will be over. The courtroom went silent, eerie silence. I looked at Sarah. She was sitting in the back row between 2 guardians. Her eyes were wide, confused, looking around, then stopping at her mother. No tears, just bewilderment. Michael sat beside her, his hands trembling. Jessica jumped up, shouting, "That's edited! That's not me! I never—" But Morales raised his hand. "Sit down." His voice was loud, not allowing any argument. I moved closer, placed my hand on the table. Justice doesn't need anyone to dress it up, Jessica. It just needs to be seen. And today, it has seen you. She recoiled, her lips trembling. I wasn't happy, nor was I gleeful. What I felt was a numb emptiness. I had imagined that this moment would bring me relief, but it hurt more than being betrayed, because I saw Sarah, the innocent child, looking at her mother as if seeing a stranger. Morales struck the gavel. The court accepts the evidence. The trial is temporarily adjourned for the jury's review. That gavel sounded like thunder in the winter. Everything seemed to end. But for me, it was only the beginning of forgiveness. As I left the courtroom, the afternoon light filtered through the large windows. The reporters rushed toward me, but I didn't answer anyone. I just wanted to breathe. Robert walked up to me, placing his hand on my shoulder. "You did it. You saved Michael." I looked at him, shaking my head slightly. Not yet, Robert. I've only saved the truth. That evening, I returned home. Michael was sitting in the living room, Sarah lying asleep in his arms. He looked up, his eyes full of tears. Mom, I don't know what to say. I thought justice only existed in books, but today I saw it. I walked over, gently touching his shoulder. Justice is actually very simple, Michael. It's not the court, not the stamps. It's when you dare to stand up, when you dare not stay silent in the face of lies. He lowered his head, hugging my hand. In that moment, I heard Sarah's steady breathing, pure, peaceful, as if the child had never been hurt. I knew all wounds would heal, but the memories would remain. I stepped out onto the balcony, looking at the city lights sparkling in the distance. The cold wind swept across my face, carrying the scent of damp steel and car exhaust. I closed my eyes, feeling the slight tremor in the palm of my hand. Not fear, but relief. Tomorrow, the court will announce its verdict. I don't know what the decision will be, but I know one thing for sure. From this moment on, Jessica can no longer hide behind lies. And Sarah, the child caught in the adult world's whirlpool, will finally have the chance to grow up in the light of truth. I smiled faintly. Not a smile of victory, but a smile from someone who has finally stopped being afraid. Justice, as it turns out, is not far away. It's in the hearts of those who dare to face the truth, no matter how painful that truth may be. That morning, Chicago was enveloped in a thick, opaque fog. The cold air sliced through my skin like thousands of tiny needles. But inside, I felt colder. Today was the day of the verdict, the day that would determine the fate of my son, my granddaughter, and the woman who had shattered everything. I sat in the car, looking up at the gray stone steps leading to the courthouse. Light rain drizzled down, each drop falling on the glass and trailing into long streaks. Every drop reminded me of the tears Michael had shed. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Beside me, Robert silently opened the door, his voice low but firm. Linda, you don't need to be strong today. Just be real. I turned to him, giving a faint smile. I don't know what being strong is anymore, Robert. But I know I have to do this last thing, so Sarah can grow up without fear. We walked into the courthouse. The air was heavy as lead. On the spectator benches, reporters jostled for space, camera flashes popping incessantly. They were chasing the sensational story. The final showdown between the legendary lawyer and the betraying daughter-in-law. But to me, there was nothing glamorous about it. This was the battlefield of broken hearts. Jessica was already there. She wore a gray coat, her face pale, eyes sunken. Gone was the trace of the proud woman who once commanded attention in any room. She tried to avoid my gaze, but when I walked to the plaintiff's bench, I could feel her breath shaking. Judge Morales entered, striking his gavel. The sound rang through the room like a countdown. "The trial begins," he said, his voice deep. Before rendering a verdict, the court will allow the plaintiff to present any additional evidence. I stood up. The eyes of dozens of people were on me, but I only looked in one direction, the corner of the room where Sarah sat with her guardian. Her eyes sparkled, innocent, not understanding why the adults had to come to court to fight over her. I swallowed hard. "Your Honor," I said, "I have one final piece of evidence. This is not about financial records or the lies that have been exposed. This is evidence of the truth from the very child who has been dragged into this battle." The room fell completely silent. I pulled a small silver USB drive from my jacket pocket. This is a recording, taken from the toy recorder Sarah carries with her. She doesn't fully understand. She just knows something is wrong. And she just wants to protect her father. Morales looked at me for a long time, then nodded, signaling the clerk to play the file. The speakers crackled, distorting the sound with static. Sarah's voice came through first, small and weak. "Mom, I don't want to lie. I'm scared it will make Dad sad." Jessica's voice responded, cold and irritated. "You don't understand, Sarah. Your dad is a bad man. If you don't say what I told you to, I'll have to leave you. Do you want that?" The child's voice choked up. "But I see that Dad loves me, Mom. He kisses me before he goes to work." There was a sharp sigh, then the sound of something falling onto the table. "That's enough. You just have to do what I say. If you make a mistake, I'll send you to live with Grandma and you'll never see me again." The sound stopped abruptly. The room fell into silence. No coughs, no heavy breaths. I looked around. Many people had their heads bowed. Some had their eyes closed. Michael sat still, his hands clenched tightly, and Sarah. The little girl sat frozen, her big round eyes wide open, staring at her mother. Jessica lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. At first, I thought she was crying, but when she looked up, I saw no tears in her eyes, only desolation and despair. Morales spoke up, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Miss Torres, the court would like to hear an explanation." Jessica stood up, her voice trembling. I did this because I was afraid of losing my child. I have no one. I didn't want Sarah to leave me. I know I was wrong, but I didn't know any other way." I stood up and looked straight at her. "No, Jessica. You didn't do this because you were afraid of losing your child. You did this because you wanted to control everything. Even the child you call your love. You taught your daughter that love can be bought with lies, and that is an unforgivable sin." She collapsed into the chair, tears beginning to fall. Her sobs echoed softly in the quiet room. I looked at her, no longer angry, only feeling pity. Morales struck the gavel, his voice booming. "The court rules. Custody of Sarah is granted to her father, Michael Villasnor. All contested assets are to be returned to him. Ms. Jessica Torres is stripped of guardianship and will be further investigated for financial fraud and witness manipulation." 3 strikes of the gavel were like 3 final blows to a verdict long written. Jessica lowered her head, her hands covering her face. The police moved toward her, but she didn't resist. She just turned to look at me with a look of utter despair. "You've won, Linda. You've taken everything from me." I shook my head, my voice soft as a breeze. "No, Jessica, I haven't taken anything. You lost everything yourself when you chose lies over love." She looked at me one last time, then bowed her head and silently walked away between 2 police officers. The sound of the courtroom door closing was the final punctuation to everything. That afternoon, I returned home with Michael and Sarah. The rain had continued, but the light had softened. The old house now felt unusually peaceful. Sarah sat on the sofa, hugging her little doll, and asked softly, "Grandma, does Mom hate me?" The question made me choke up. I looked at Michael. He shook his head, trying to hide his tears. I bent down, holding Sarah's hand. "No, sweetheart, your mom doesn't hate you. She just forgot how to love. One day she'll learn again." Sarah looked at me and nodded. Her smile was so innocent, it was heart-wrenching. That evening, After Michael put Sarah to bed, I went out onto the balcony. The rain had stopped, and only the droplets remained on the railing. I poured a glass of wine, sitting and watching the city lights reflected in the glass, sparkling like thousands of broken memories. Robert called. "It's all over," he said. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "It's only just begun. Justice may come, but healing takes time." He paused, then spoke softly. "You did the right thing. You didn't just win in court. You saved a child from the darkness." I smiled. "Thank you, Robert. But the one who needs saving is me." I hung up, sitting quietly for a long time. In the house, I could hear Michael comforting Sarah to sleep, the sound of Sarah's soft laughter. That sound, simple, small, was the greatest gift I had ever received. I whispered to myself, "Truth can be painful, but only it can set us free." Outside, the pale moonlight filtered through the clouds, casting its glow on the window. I closed my eyes, letting my heart drift in the rare calm. Deep inside, I knew. Today, an old chapter had closed, but the journey of forgiveness had only just begun. The morning after the trial, I woke up earlier than usual. The first light of day poured through the curtains, fragile like a golden thread, stretching between two worlds, the past and the present. The house was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. After all these years, for the first time, I felt that the atmosphere in this house was no longer heavy. But that peace made my heart feel heavy. On the table, piles of papers, judgments, and files were neatly stacked, with only a steaming cup of coffee left untouched. I reached out and took it, sipping slowly. The bitterness was still there, but this time, I didn't need any sugar. Sometimes, bitterness is what helps us realize that we are still alive. I heard the door open gently. Michael stepped in, the early light shining on his face. He looked tired, but his eyes were different, no longer weighed down by fear, but shining with a spark of someone who had just found himself again. Sarah ran in after him, her hair messy, laughing joyfully. She hugged her new doll to her chest, her tiny feet pattering on the floor. "Grandma, can we go out for breakfast today?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. I smiled softly, ruffling her hair. "Of course, my dear. It's a beautiful day." Michael sat down opposite me, looking at me for a long moment before saying, "Mom, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, I would have lost everything." I shook my head gently. "No, Michael. You never lost anything. You just forgot how strong you really are." He bowed his head, taking my hand. "Do you know, last night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jessica. No matter what she did, I still feel sorry for her. Maybe, somewhere in her, there's still a part of her that knows fear, knows how to love." I stayed silent. His words reminded me of myself many years ago, when I too had been betrayed. When I had believed that people do bad things because they had no other way out. I sighed. "You have a kind heart, Michael. But remember, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness is when we don't let the pain lead us anymore." In the afternoon, I went to the courthouse to sign a few remaining documents. The hallway was empty. The sunlight streaming through the windows created long streaks on the floor, like unfinished stories being drawn out. At the end of the hall, Judge Morales was standing, holding a cup of coffee, gazing out the window. When he saw me, he smiled faintly, the rare smile I had seen only once throughout the trial. "Mrs. Villesneur." He nodded. "I assume you're here to pick up your documents." Yes, I replied, but I also want to say thank you. He took a sip of coffee, smiling softly. You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing my job. I looked at him with sincere eyes. No, sir. You've done much more than that. You dared to look straight into the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. Not everyone can do that. Morales was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly. When I listened to Sarah's recording yesterday, I couldn't sleep. You know, Linda, for 30 years with the gavel in my hand, I always believed I was tough, that I could distinguish between law and emotions. But for the first time, I realized that justice isn't a stone. It has a soul. And yesterday, that soul trembled. I looked at him, my gaze softening. Perhaps that's what makes you a truly righteous man. He smiled sadly. You're too kind. But I'm only human. There were times I thought about Jessica, not to excuse her, but to understand how someone could turn love into such a cruel tool. I whispered, because they're afraid. When people fear losing love, they'll do anything, even hurt the ones they love. But the truth is, true love never needs to be fought for. It just needs to be protected. Morales nodded. You're right. Today, I saw Sarah in the courthouse yard. She was smiling brightly, and I realized sometimes justice is simply bringing back that smile. We stood still for a while. There was something soothing, as if the past had been washed away. Before I left, Morales spoke softly. You know, Linda, justice can be enforced by the law, but forgiveness can only come from the heart. I hope you find that for yourself too. In the evening, I returned home to find Sarah sitting in the living room drawing. Sheets of paper were scattered across the table, and in the center was a drawing she was working on. 3 people holding hands under a blue sky. I walked over and sat down beside her. What are you drawing, Sarah? The little girl looked up, her eyes sparkling. I'm drawing you, Dad, and Mom. Mom is smiling, see? I looked at the drawing. Jessica in a blue dress, standing beside Michael and Sarah, the sunlight casting a gentle glow on her kind face. My heart tightened, but it didn't ache like before. It's beautiful, my dear. Keep this picture. One day, when your mom is ready, give it to her. Sarah smiled and nodded. Yes, Grandma. Mom will smile a lot. I gently stroked her hair, thinking to myself, perhaps this child understands love more than all the adults combined. In the evening, I sat alone in the living room. Outside, the night wind blew through the trees, bringing a soft, soothing rustle. I opened the old notebook, once filled with legal notes and sharp arguments. I used to win against others. On the last page, I wrote a new line. Forgiveness is not erasing the wrongs, but accepting that people can change. Robert called, his voice still warm and steady. Linda, have you heard the news? Jessica has withdrawn her appeal. She accepts the verdict and is asking for psychological treatment. I replied softly. I heard. Perhaps that's the best start for her. Sometimes, to save oneself, one must first hit rock bottom. He paused for a moment before asking, Do you feel at peace? I smiled, my eyes gazing out of the window where the silver moonlight reflected on the rooftops. Not exactly at peace, Robert, but I feel calm. Calm because, in the end, Sarah won't grow up with lies. And calm because I dared to forgive. Not for Jessica, but for myself. Robert chuckled softly. I've never met anyone like you, Linda. You fight with justice, but you end with compassion. I replied, my voice soft as a breeze. Without compassion, justice is just punishment. And without justice, Compassion is weakness. Both need to stand together. When I stepped outside onto the porch, the night sky stretched out like a smooth black velvet cloth. The moonlight fell, shimmering on the droplets of dew still clinging to the railing. I closed my eyes, inhaling the damp, cold air, then opened my eyes to look up at the sky. I thought about everything: Michael, Sarah, Jessica, and even the old version of myself. I used to believe that justice was the end goal. But now, I understand that justice is the path, while forgiveness is the destination. I smiled, softly whispering, "Forgiveness is the only thing that sets people free." Inside the house, Sarah's laughter rang out, clear and bright. I turned around and saw Michael carrying her on his shoulders, spinning her around under the golden light. That scene warmed my heart. I gently closed the door behind me, leaving the laughter and light within. And I knew, for the first time in many years, I was no longer the one carrying the wounds, but the one guarding the peace. The morning after the trial, I woke up as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains, delicate like a golden thread stretching between two worlds, the past and the present. The house was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. After so many years, for the first time, I felt that the atmosphere in this house was no longer heavy, but it was this very peace that made my heart feel heavy. On the table, stacks of papers, judgments, and files were neatly arranged, with only a steaming cup of coffee left. I reached for it and took a small sip. The bitterness still lingered, but this time, I didn't need sugar. Sometimes, bitterness is what reminds us we're still alive. I heard the door creak open. Michael walked in, the early light casting over his face. He looked tired, but his eyes were different, no longer weighed down by fear, but now shining with the light of someone who had just found themselves again. Sarah followed him, her hair in disarray, laughing joyfully. She held a new doll close to her chest, her tiny feet pattering on the wooden floor. "Grandma, wake up! The rose tree has bloomed!" Sarah shouted, her voice full of excitement. I chuckled softly, ruffling her hair. "Really? Then we better go see it right now." We headed to the garden together. The first roses of the season bloomed in the sunlight, their petals damp with dew, giving off a soft fragrance. Sarah bent down carefully to smell them, then whispered, "It smells like the perfume Mom used to wear." I paused for a moment and nodded. Yes, she really liked the scent of roses. She smiled, innocently as the sun. I realized then that time is truly the most magical remedy. It doesn't erase memories, but it soothes the wounds we once thought would never heal. That afternoon, Michael came home early. He was still the same man, quiet and composed, but his eyes were brighter, more confident. He had reopened his small interior design company, spending most of his time with Sarah. She called him Super Dad, and I couldn't deny. He truly deserved that title. "I just got news from the treatment center," Michael said as we sat in the living room. "Jessica is about to finish her treatment. She's asking to meet Sarah, just for a few minutes." I don't know whether to agree. I put my teacup down, looking at him for a long moment. There was some hesitation in my heart, a vague fear that old wounds would be reopened. But then I thought of Sarah, the little girl who needed a complete truth, not a story that had been hidden away. "They should meet," I said softly. "Not because Jessica deserves it, but because Sarah needs to close that chapter. Forgiveness is not for the other person. It's for ourselves. Michael was silent for a moment before nodding. You're always right, Mom. That day, I prepared everything carefully. It wasn't like a fateful meeting, but rather a conversation between two souls trying to heal. When Jessica entered, I almost didn't recognize her. She was thinner, her face bare of makeup, her eyes sad but clear. Sarah ran to her, stopping for a moment when she saw her mother, then shyly smiled. Mom. Jessica knelt down and embraced her tightly. Sarah, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I don't deserve to hear you call me that anymore, but I thank you for still doing so. Sarah put her hand on her mother's cheek, her voice as clear as a droplet of water. Grandma said that if we truly apologize, others will feel it. I forgive you, Mom, and don't cry anymore. I stood still. In that moment, I saw something that, as a lawyer, I rarely get to witness: true repentance. Not in words, but in the eyes. Jessica looked at me and whispered, Thank you, Linda, for not letting me disappear in hatred. I smiled, speaking slowly. You don't need to thank me. Thank your daughter. She's the light. Jessica lowered her head and turned away, tears falling on the tile floor. I watched her go, and I no longer felt bitterness. I only felt relief. Finally, we had broken free from the whirlpool of the past. A month later, Michael and I took Sarah to a picnic at Lake Michigan. The sky was a deep blue, the wind blowing freely, and the sound of seagulls echoed far away. Sarah let a paper boat float on the water, shouting, Dad! Grandma! The boat will go to Mom! Michael smiled and turned to me. See? She never stops believing in the good. I nodded, my eyes watering. Because it was born out of love, not out of mistakes. We sat there, watching the small paper boat float away. It didn't need to reach a shore. It just needed to float. Just like how people need to let go to move on. That evening, after Sarah had fallen asleep, I sat on the porch, the silver moonlight casting over my hair, now touched with the signs of age. Michael brought out 2 glasses of wine and placed one in front of me. Mom, he said, I think everything that has happened has made me realize that justice isn't just in the courtroom. It's in how we live on. I smiled. You've learned the lesson that took me a lifetime to understand. He looked at me, his gaze warm. Do you ever regret going back to court all those years ago? I paused. Yes, I do. There were times when I feared I was reliving old pain, but if I hadn't gone back, I wouldn't have seen Sarah smile or seen you find yourself again. Sometimes, God leads us through the fire not to burn us, but to shape us into someone new. Michael was silent, looking up at the sky. You're right. I think I'm ready to forgive Jessica, not because she deserves it, but because I want Sarah to grow up in love, not in darkness. I gently placed my hand on my son's shoulder, filled with pride and emotion. My son has really grown up. As the night fell, I went to my room and opened the old notebook where I had recorded every major event. On the last page, I wrote one more line. Justice brings safety, but only forgiveness brings peace. I closed the notebook, placed it on the shelf, and looked out the window. The moonlight cast down on the little house, once a battlefield of tears, now a home of laughter. Sarah turned in her sleep and softly called, Grandma. I walked over, pulled the blanket over her, and kissed her gently on the forehead. Sleep well, my little angel. Tomorrow will be another beautiful day. I turned back to the porch, sat in the familiar wooden chair. The night breeze blew through, gently caressing my skin. carrying the scent of roses from the small garden. I closed my eyes, feeling the soft beat of my heart, harmonizing with the sounds of life, peaceful, gentle, and real. In my heart, a quiet whisper echoed, not of hatred, not of resentment, but of gratitude. Grateful for the pain that made me stronger. Grateful for those who hurt me, because they taught me what it means to forgive. Justice ended in the courtroom. But the journey of healing continues every day. In each hug from Sarah, in each smile from Michael, and in the peace I have found within my own heart. I lifted my head, smiled at the night sky, and whispered a promise. Family is where we learn to forgive others, and more importantly, to forgive ourselves. And I knew that was the last chapter of pain, but the first chapter of a new life. Life sometimes doesn't need grand victories, but simply a person brave enough to stand up amidst the ruins, bold enough to say, I have been hurt, but I am no longer afraid. Linda has walked that journey, from the anger of betrayal to the moment of letting go of hatred. She didn't seek revenge with swords, but with the light of truth. And when justice finally spoke, what remained in her heart was not pride, but peace. Because revenge, at times, is merely a way to reclaim what has been stolen. Not possessions, not honor, but the belief that one deserves to be loved. And when Linda chose to forgive, she didn't diminish herself. She stood tall, stepping over the wounds, allowing others to learn how to find their own light in the darkness of their own lives. If you've ever been through wounds like Linda's, betrayed, misunderstood, forced to be strong, then perhaps you understand that forgiveness is not for others, but a gift you give to yourself. A person can take away your trust, but they cannot touch the kindness within you unless you allow them to. So, if this story has made you reflect, leave a comment. No need for many words, just one short line. I have forgiven, but I still remember. That is not weakness. It is the declaration of those who have fallen, but have chosen to rise again, just like me. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. Share your thoughts below, so, together, we can continue writing the chapters of healing, where justice is not only served, but also felt with the heart.